Space Hat is a futuristic platformer shooter made by Happy Hours, a team of 5 people in Unreal Engine. The theme didn't seem too relevant to hats at first, but the link is that you play as a cybernetic bounty hunter called Vega, no, not the one from Doom, who has a special hat that allows her to teleport. Or that's the basic tale on the Steam page. The hat is capable of much more and is a key game mechanic, but I'll get onto that in a minute. On the spaceship cockpit main menu, I delved to the credits and got a bit more info. This game is not a student project, but if I interpret the credits right, it's an advancement on a game called Space Hat Reloaded, which was made as a student project presumably by the same developers at Lycée Paris School of Animation and Games. They state clearly their intent to make a full-fledged version of the game, so this game acts as a kind of in-between version, presumably so they can test and adjust before the full release. Now with fresh context, I jumped into playing. There were options to continue, start a new game, or for level select. Level select showed 3 challenges beneath each of the 2 levels. Finish the level, finish with no deaths, and finish in less than 10 minutes. My first run of level 1 was to get a feel for the game. The controls are simple and explained via tutorial messages through the level. Some are pop-ups, which once you get the hang of things can be a bit annoying as they disrupt the flow when you're trying to speedrun, but it's an easy solution as there's a checkbox in the settings to turn tutorials off and on as desired. It's WASD to move, space to jump and double jump, left mouse to shoot, right mouse to throw your hat. Wherever the hat lands you will teleport to, unless there's an object blocking the pathway between your current position and your hat's position. If that happens, the game will try and teleport you, but you won't actually move. R changes your weapon mode from a shotgun to a rapid fire, and it changes your HUD red so you can tell the difference. E is for a melee attack. You can also crouch or slide if you have momentum, with control, and shift is to dash, but only when you're moving. The second you start, the timer is running in the bottom left corner, and the game starts you off with platforming segments so it can explain to you the controls via both signage and dialogue. Eventually you get to a point with a couple of enemies, giving you a short taste of combat. There are a mix of melee and ranged enemies, but I'll dig into that later. That's how the rest of the level runs. You platform a bit, you hit a combat segment where you might go a couple of rounds, then you move on until you reach the end, which is 3 waves of enemies. The game pushes pace as a key motivator. The timer is one method, but its mechanics manage the speed of the game very well. Let's talk the hat. It plays a role in both platforming and combat. Initially you use it to teleport through gaps, but it advances on that pretty quickly. If you throw the hat and shoot it whilst it's in the air, you will instantly teleport to it. This also resets your cooldowns, so you can throw the hat again and land it on a surface to teleport a second time, and you can double jump again. So you can throw the hat, shoot it, do 1 jump, and throw the hat again. You can't also shoot the hat again and chain it, you only get 1 shot on the hat for the instant teleport. The game calls this a hat trick. This move automatically switches your gun to automatic fire mode as well, and a bonus feature during combat is that if your charge bar on the bottom right corner is higher than 50% full, executing the move will also slow time briefly. You don't use any of that charge bar when firing after a hat trick for a few seconds either. Time is slowed down for the first few seconds as well whenever you hold right mouse to hold your hat prior to use, giving you more time to aim it properly as well. The other feature of the hat that I almost did accidentally but have bad aim is that if you aim it at an enemy, you get a red crosshair. If you throw it at them with that crosshair active, it stuns them as they try to pull it off, and if you shoot them while stunned, it's an instant kill. You dash towards them and receive health from the kill. Both of these mechanics open up much wider vertical and lateral limits to both combat and platforming, and you can see this enabled in the level design. Your main hazards whilst platforming are falling, and a big laser bar in this open area here that moves towards you, and you have to get above it to stay safe. The second level is even broader in this way, with huge open gaps to jump across, but between 2 teleports, 3 total jumps, and 2 dashes, you can cover quite a lot of ground quite accessibly. You can also see this reflected in gameplay, since I repeated the first level a few times in succession to try and beat the time and deaths challenges, and the dynamics of the combat look quite different when you're comfortable with all of the movement mechanics. Your 2 main monitoring points are your health and your charge bar. You lose health taking hits from enemies but not from fall damage, and you gain it back through hat kills or health pickups around arenas. Your charge bar is used whenever you fire your weapon in automatic fire mode when you've switched it there yourself, and when you initially execute a hat trick. That first move of shooting your hat takes 20% of your charge bar, but the following shots don't use any of it, as said before. You get charge back with blue pickups around arenas or when they're dropped from kills. There's nothing special to do to get charge back from a kill, unlike with health. As said before, your enemies are mixes of long and short range. Your ranged enemies start as standard shooters, then you pick up some faster shooters who have a green trim on them, and then you get turrets. It stops there for level 1, but in level 2 you also get snipers, and flying drones that shoot at you as well. The rapid shooters seem to be able to tank 2 or 3 shots, whilst basic enemies can take 1 to 2 hits, and the snipers, turrets and drones can also weather a few hits, but none of them are particularly glassy or spongy, and it adds another layer of picking enemies to target. With the hat stun, the enemies become one-hit kills, so in the heat of combat specifically aiming for tankier enemies to stun helps you cut through the wave more easily. Your melee enemies only have 2 varieties. You've got your cavemen that run up and beat you with sharp sticks, and your riot guards that have big annoying shields that you can't damage. These melee enemies add to the need for movement, as, unless you specifically pick them off first, you can't stand still for long, hence they run down and chop you up. The shielded enemies can only be shot or stunned from above or behind, so using the hat trick is great, but you can also just jump over them or teleport past them normally and kill them that way. But you do have to joust with them a bit. Their designs are varied enough to be able to pick out their type from range as well, which is handy. Altogether, the gameplay balance and flow is very well executed. The enemy mix forces you to keep moving, dodging out to escape damage, and diving back into combat to get a healing kill or a health or power pickup, so that you can jump back into the rafters and rain hell down from the sky with your time slowing. Your melee attack is a nice throw-in if you get stuck or your aim sucks, like mine, and you can vary short and long range combat. The slowing of time when you first grip the hat when you aim it for a few seconds, and when you do a 50% charge hat trick, is really necessary to control the flow of combat. Without it, the game would be overwhelmingly fast because of the volume of enemies and directions they come from. It brims just on the edge of controlled mayhem, but those slow time moments give you the breathing room to get your hands back on the reins when you're starting to feel pressed, and together it works fantastically for a challenging but enjoyable environment. The overall theme of the game is also well executed. Despite similar environments, none of the levels seem samey, and sometimes finding your further path can be part of the challenge, as at some points you enter an area low down and have to leave it high up, or the reverse. The first level is designed as main corridors. It's all spacecraft themed with metal sliding doors, catwalks, and of course the initial cutscene with you docking into your game zone on a spacecraft. The story is that you are a bounty hunter chasing down a shipper called the Mule to kill him and then leave. This gives context to the size of some of the areas and the use of containers in a lot of the environments, since it all feeds into being a large cargo storage area. The second level comes after you're dumped down a chute into the lower levels, so you get more piping and functional guts of an industrial workplace, though it's mostly the same as level 1. But with the pace high and different heights and space sizes, none of it feels the same. Visuals and sounds are well done. The visuals you can see here are the settings on Ultra. You get great feedback from your shots, recoil and shake animations from your weapons, you've got a hat marker to aim your hat throw, particle effects on shooting, a touch of motion blur, and blood spatter on kill. though no marks are left from kills and bodies disappear. Your hat is visible at the top of your screen when worn, so you know when you can throw it, but it's not so low down as to be invasive, which is good. And for all your shots, collectibles, hits landed on you and your hat coming back, you get audio cues, which are very good to keep track of what's happening. You get a moisture effect on the screen after kills as well, which some people might not like, but I had no problem with it. Colour and glow are used really nicely for details on your own character's arm and weapons, and to distinguish enemies in a busy arena, as said before, they have their own body colours for each type, and the ranged enemy's gunfire is the same colour as them, so you can also tell them apart from distance too. The details are subtle, but when you have a lot of information to process at pace, it helps you separate everything out, and it makes the combat look and feel satisfying. As does the music. The rock tracks are great backing for fights and makes you feel super cool. Okay, I've sung praises for a while, so it's time to balance with some points to note. The first thing I noticed is that the mouse sensitivity on default settings is very high, and that's coming from someone who normally likes hair trigger response on an FPS. Of course, there are sliders to turn it down on the settings menu, since it starts at max sensitivity, so you can knock it down a bit, so the problem is minor, but it's a rare issue when I find it too sensitive. The other minor detail is the voice acting. Generally it does the job and fits the tone. It's kind of robotic, in places there are some tones that don't fully match, which does work for a robot voice. What you should know, and is disclaimed on the Steam page, is that the voice acting in this game is done by AI. I know, it's a dirty word. The only real issue with it here is that it reads the script verbatim, which is great as long as your script is actually grammatically correct. It is a little jarring to my brain to hear the words "an hat trick."
This action is called an hat trick.
Or, I hope there's not only weapons in those containers.
I hope there's not only weapons in those containers.
Like where sneaky hobbitses might put them. The small point here is, check your spelling if you're going to get AI to read it, because AI will not use context to say it properly. You can slip spelling mistakes by the average person much more easily than verbal mispronunciation. Though I have to say, I do enjoy a bit of posh British swearing. Shit.
Shit.
Bastard.
Bastard.
The crouch and slide control can be a bit finicky. If you're running already, the control button becomes a slide, so it allows you to keep some momentum as you're moving. But if you're not, you just crouch and crawl kind of slowly. When you're trying to go fast through the level and beat the 10-minute timer, those moments moving between arenas are your best bet to trim time, since arenas are much more random, so making a clearer divide between when you'll start sliding on pressing control versus crouching would help a bit. Something like a minor pace change, or a sound, or a little indicator, like you have the slow-mo indicator in the bottom right to tell you if you have enough charge for slow-mo, it would be quite handy. A few times I managed to get a few steps before trying to slide through a vent, but it would just make me crawl, and it would cost more time to go back up for a running start, and then try sliding through. As mentioned at the start, the hat teleport doesn't always work if the game perceives there to be a blockage between you and a direct line to the hat. This becomes a bit marginal of an issue when you're falling as the hat is landing. In a couple of places you can jump out for range and throw the hat, but if it hits the wall and not the floor first, sometimes it stalls, and if you fall too far in that time, it will reject the teleport and you'll just fall and die. Sometimes you throw it and fall really far, but it still lets you teleport even though the angle has a wall in the way. Sometimes it won't accept that. Sometimes, though, you can throw the hat at a wall and it will teleport you even though there's not really a platform there. Maybe because it detects a short ledge as the ground? I'm not 100%, but a couple of times I tried to throw the hat through a gap as a shortcut and it wouldn't accept it, and sometimes it would. This obviously can do a bit of damage to speedrunning. One thing I can't specifically pin the reason for is that sometimes it feels like your weapon stalls or has a cooldown without there being any visual cue for it or it being mentioned anywhere. For example, sometimes you can rapid fire or fire repeatedly with the shotgun, but sometimes if you've fired multiple times in a row, the shot rate appears to slow, or clicking to shoot, nothing happens. Sometimes you do a hat trick with intent to shoot a burst, then shoot another burst, but that second burst doesn't actually happen when you click. It's only a second or two later that it seems to fix itself, but again it can break the flow of combat a bit when you're trying to blast people and your gun just doesn't. There is a slight lag to the fire rate when you enter the slow time, which makes some sense, but sometimes it just doesn't shoot at all. The biggest problem to note I found accidentally, during combat. I launched up in the air, threw my hat at an enemy on a platform and stunned him, and then shot a barrel next to him. He looked not to have died initially when he fell to the ground, but then he kind of crumpled on the floor with the hat on, so when I executed him to get it back, the forward rush you normally get with a hat kill sent me through the floor of the map and into space, where I then free fell eternally. This, I imagine, is quite an unlikely bug, since it's not normal for an enemy to be that low down when stunned. They're normally stood upright. But that might be to do with the angle of the forward dash. I did manage to recreate this twice afterward in the same place. Just jumped up, stunned with the hat, blew him off the edge, and then shot him when he was on the ground, and the same thing happened. I'm no dev, so I will leave that to them to answer. There are a lot of pieces to put together this game, but they come together into a tough but enjoyable experience. Fast-paced, difficult combat that tests your awareness of your health, power, and the enemies around you is well facilitated by wide layered arenas and similar platforming segments. The combat is focused as the main point and the platforming the enabler, with only the level design, one danger wall and some specific wall running as features to add challenge and variety, stopping the platforming being boring but keeping it subtle. The final boss arena is 4 waves and a real challenge for the end of the game. It took me 3 attempts to beat, but it forces you to manage yourself better, prioritise targets, aim better, and not be greedy. You don't actually even need to kill all of the enemies in the final wave, you can just take the boss down and run. But it is hard to do this without getting shanked in the back by the million ads that are there. I'm not sure their plans for the full game and if they intend to expand it, but I think the final area of the second level cusps on a comfortable difficulty, so I'm not sure if they want to add more levels, how they could up the difficulty without it maybe being a bit too hard. The other option is adding complexity and a bit more pressure on timing. As long as there's space in the arena to briefly get some downtime and reset every once in a while during the combat segments, I think the balance can be kept nicely. It'll be interesting to see what they do with it. I got an easy 2 to 3 hours out of it between completing it the first time and then trying to beat the 10-minute and no deaths challenges. It's good drive for replayability, and it's a good way to kill a couple of hours with some fast, fun combat. It's got a few things that could be tweaked to really level it out, but generally runs very well. So I will give Space Hat a 9 out of 10.